All right. Well, welcome everybody to On the Record. Today we have a special episode that is virtual because we are tuning in with somebody across the pond in the UK, a friend of mine who I will introduce to you, Mr. Marco Chiavetta. So, the reason why this is a special episode is actually because part of the reason I started this podcast was because I was in conversation with this man right here early on, about a little over a year ago. Because I wasn't ballsy enough to start a podcast, I needed a little bit more inspiration. But in this process, I had to absolutely have him on the podcast because he was part of the birth of this thing. So, welcome, Marco.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I love it. So, just give you a little bit of background. Marco comes to us from a long career coaching professional football in the English Football League. And now he is a leadership coach for one of the largest companies in the world. We will remain nameless there. And so he is a confidant, a really great friend. And we have a lot of really great conversations. And in the creation of this podcast, talking about music and how it affects our lives, I wanted to make sure we have a lot of diverse perspectives. And he definitely does, which is why he's on the podcast today. Um, so, one of the things, especially if you are brand new here to On the Record, what do we do? So essentially, we talk about how music affects our lives, and that could be songs, artists, producers, songwriters, all of the above here. And we want to make sure we dissect those and talk about how they've impacted us in a special way, and how we use music day to day in our lives to assist in our mental health. So, I actually want to start out this call asking you, Marco, when did your relationship with music start?
So I think it's a really interesting question, and hopefully, as we go through the episode, we'll get a little bit more of an idea around things. But my kind of love for music really started young. There's a 9-year age gap between me and my brother,
Hmm.
Pasquale, and he lives music. He runs his own music events. He's ran some of the biggest kind of club nights in the UK with house music. So I'd have to say, for me personally, it's kind of 8, 9 years old, watching my brother, probably even younger than that, maybe 6 or 7, watching my brother DJ in his bedroom and playing the same 3 records over and over again, trying to learn how to DJ and beat match and things like that. So definitely from kind of 5, 6 years old, I started with house music with my brother, and um, that seeing how happy he was and how happy I was in the moments that I got to spend with him. And then as we go through the episode, it will, music became big for me with sport, and there's a lot of quiet time or a lot of focused time, and music became quite a big influential part of my life, definitely. But I'd have to say 5, 6 years old was definitely when I remember recognizing the emotional effects that music had on me.
Oh, I love that. I love listening to the same 2 or 3 records over and over as he's practicing because that's
I'm not
definitely.
sure. I'm not sure the neighbours liked it, but yeah, it's especially when it comes to house music. I think if you don't really know it, it sounds repetitive as it is. So, um,
That is so true. I know you and I had a conversation about that because my connection to music or my love of music actually starts with lyric, right? And I'm obsessed with lyrics and story. And when we were talking, just as normal friends, you're like, huh, that's funny because I never connect to that. And it's because you started with house music and there's no words, right?
yeah, it's definitely based around a groove. That's for sure. It's kind of that's what hooks me more than anything else.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And as you all are getting familiar with each episode, one question I always ask every single guest I have on is, what is your relationship with music? And you can choose from I can't live without it to a part of my daily life. And that's actually what you put in here, that it's a part of your daily life. Explain that to me.
I think, again, from a young age, music was always in and around me, kind of mum cleaning the house and Italian music being on, to my brother making it part of his life, to, sport from a young age, being involved in sport at a high level. You refocus, you're trying to get in the right frame of mind for a game or for things like that. And then in later life, so over the last kind of 6-7 years, I've got a couple of dogs, and I'm out for between 2 and 4 hours a day, and it's a long old slog if you haven't got something worth listening to. So yeah, definitely day to day, 100%. If a walk isn't worth going on if I haven't got music to listen to.
Exactly. No, I love it. Yeah, that would be a very interesting walk. That leaves you with entirely too much time to think if there's nothing distracting you. And
Uh,
I mean, that's not a bad thing, but I mean, that 2 to 4 hours of just thinking about things, when life makes you focus and think all the time, you just want to zone out, right?
Sometimes, yeah, definitely.
Wonderful. So, for today, you actually chose a song and an album, two different things to talk about, which I love. The first thing you chose, the first song you chose, I should actually say, was The Roots, Guns Are Drawn, which is a classic. And I want you to tell me, like, where your connection to that specific song came in.
You know what? It's a strange one because I've been thinking about it and I can't actually remember when I first listened to it. So I genuinely can't remember when the first time I listened to that song was. But it is a track that, no matter what mood I'm in, it's the only track, it's the only song that, no matter what mood I'm in, I can play it and it will just completely recenter me and just either relax me or refocus me, whatever I need. If it's almost like a complete reset button. So if you were to,
Yeah.
when IT says turn it off and turn it back on again, that's the Roots Guns Are Drawn has always been kind of my turn it off and turn it back on again track. And like I said, I've got no idea where that came from, but it's definitely been influential in that side of it.
Yeah, I love that. It's an incredible song. So, as the listeners know, I listen to every song, track, or album that my guests talk about, and I just kind of get lost in them. And it's probably my favorite thing about prepping for these. And listening to it over and over, it just has like the perfect theme, and it really kind of talks about a battle, right?
Yeah.
And battling through things, which is the theme of this show in general. Um, and you talk about it being a reset button for you. Is there a specific battle that you can think about? Because I love our listeners to kind of learn from each guest that you've gone through that has kind of tied to that song.
So it's a difficult question on the side of there's
Mhm.
nothing specific with that particular song.
Yeah.
I think kind of throughout 30 years, I've had a lot of mental struggles, and I've been to the deepest, darkest places, unfortunately, and fortunately, I've come out the other side, and I've I've definitely listened to that track in moments where things are hard and things are a struggle, and back when I worked in football, in it would be a constant song that was played when just everything was too much. So there would be particular times, for example, kind of badging up a kit. So the jerseys, the squad jerseys, and you're looking at 2-3 days of work to put everyone's names on the back and the numbers and things like that. And that song would just get played potentially 15, 16, 17 times just on repeat to
Right.
just give me a bit of will of life to
Yeah.
kind of get through this task. But
Yeah.
that's one particular moment that I can remember kind of listening to that song, especially where just in the changing rooms with one heat press, 1,000 letters, 1,000 numbers, and and 75 to 100 shirts, and having to print all these shirts out and make sure that it's done. And I suffer a little bit from anxiety, and my anxiety causes a bit of OCD, so trying to
Yeah.
line up letters for people's
Yeah.
names and the numbers and things like that, it was definitely a frustrating time, to say the least. And that would definitely be a moment where I use that song.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, when you're just like, "Oh, there's a mountain to climb ahead of me, and I don't know how I'm gonna do this, sane." And when you look at those mountains, because I know you were in football for so long, such a long, glorious career, and when it becomes hard, what was the thing in your career in football that was so challenging? Because I know it's so incredibly time consuming. There's a ton of travel, there's a ton that's coming at you. What was that for you?
You know what? I think the biggest challenge is you can be very well respected within your industry, within your job, and do what you need to do
Yeah.
with zero progression, especially
Mhm.
kind of when I was in the sport. It was very much based around the people you knew and kind of playing that political game. And, you
Right.
know, I mean, as being friends, I'm not the most work political savvy person around, and sometimes kind of my principles would be, I would vocalize very strongly. So I think the struggle was kind of people saying that I could do what I could do so well, but at the same time not feeling that I was getting rewarded. And some people might say I was rewarded, and I wouldn't turn that down. But personally, you have kind of that feeling where you're not quite getting back what you should be. And the hours, you're putting in 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week, and it's very temperamental in the front of, if somebody wants to do something the next day and you're supposed to have a day off, there's no day off anymore.
Right.
So it's kind of trying to balance, you know, the work and life side of things, where the
Mhm.
reality is in football, especially within the UK, that has to become your life. And I think that was the biggest struggle, where it became really difficult when, I wouldn't say I fell out of love with the game. It was more, I fell out of love with the lifestyle being, okay, this has to be everything. I don't, there's no work life balance. Work is life. And if you enjoy it, the best thing you could ever do. But if you
Right.
get to that point where it's a little bit more of a struggle, then it becomes quite difficult. And I think that was probably the most difficult thing for me, with that particular industry.
Yeah, I think balance is a great topic to talk through, because I think so many people even listening to this can relate to, you're doing something so incredibly well and you just don't feel like you're being rewarded for it, or you don't get the promotion you want, or you keep running into walls, and you're trying to figure out what to do in those moments. What was your decision in those moments where you're like, when you kind of finally hit it and you're like, okay, I need to make a change? What
Mm.
was that catalyst for you to make a change and do something?
I was quite lucky, where my catalyst was very kind of black and white. I reached a point in my career where I'd applied for a few roles, and I was point blank told, look, you meet the requirements, but we're not going to employ you for this particular reason. And the reason was the same for two,
Mhm.
three different jobs that I went for. And it was kind of like, okay, well, that's actually completely out of my control. It's not to do with me. It's not to do with my experience or my qualifications. This particular topic is kind of, well, I can't overcome that right now. And I'd already fallen out of love with what I was doing. It was a job, and I believed myself that I deserved to be at a certain level, doing a certain role, and I couldn't get it. So it was just at a point where, okay, I'm done here. There's the money's not worth it where I am. The work life balance is non-existent. So nothing's really playing off each other. Nothing's kind of making it worthwhile. So
Yes.
I was fortunate enough to be contacted by a recruitment officer for the company that I'm still with now, and I was like, I've got to do something, and it's a way out. It allows me to pay the mortgage. It allows me to continue to live until I find something I want to do. And turns out that this is what I want to do.
Which is great. How scary was that? Because one, I know what that's like, making a completely different shift from what you're used to and, doing football for 10, 15 years to something completely different.
Yeah. So after I made the move, it was more apparent kind of how afraid I was or how scary it was to do. But at the time, um, like I really, really struggled with my mental health, and the move was almost forced. It just came.
You're right.
So I didn't even think about it. It was kind of, well, this is what I have right now. It doesn't work. This is what I'm going to. It works. So let's just do it. And I've always been quite pragmatic and been able to push emotion aside and things like that. And it just happened. And then after I got into the role, I was kind of like, I don't know if I can keep this. Like, this is all I've ever done from 10 years old is football. I went to university. I did sports science and business management. The university I went to was because of football, and it was kind of like, I'm so far out my depth. Like, I don't know if I can keep hold of this. And the fear more came from there, because I felt like I was going to get found out, and it was kind of, I'm going to get found out in a minute, and then I'm going to have to actually go and find a job.
It's imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah,
That's
100%.
starts tapping in. How did you work through that part? Because I know that was a struggle. We've had conversations about that.
Yeah. So again, the music was massive, because I used to walk Alfie. I used to walk my first dog loads, and that was kind of my downtime. David Brailsford, who is a British psychologist, he refers to attitude as like a gas tank. There's like a petrol tank, and every now and then it runs empty, and you have to keep filling it up. Otherwise, you'll just run on empty. And the walks were the only thing that kept me going. So I used to go on these walks, and again, just put my earbuds in, and that was it. Just tune out to the world, tune off, and go for it. And I'm trying to get back into that habit a little bit, where literally it'd be 4 hours of the day where my phone wouldn't come out my pocket. It was just put an album on, put a playlist on, and just walk and enjoy it. And I managed to go on some really massive and great hikes, and kind of took advantage of that as much as I could. And that's kind of how I handled it, really, just going on walks and listening to music and having my own time.
And I love kind of that segue and that transition, because it was something that you realized you need to do for your mental health, and it turned into now this habit that you have, where this is what recenters you every day. Because I'm a big fan of creating tools for yourself, right? Like you were talking about the gas tank. You have to fill the gas tank back up, and that's actually a daily practice, right? Like, life is gonna life. They're gonna throw random things at you all the time, and you're gonna have to figure out how to deal with it and how you respond to it. But the things that you love have to be implanted in almost every single day to get from one day to the next. Um, for your walks, because I love that you brought that up, and you throw on an album or a playlist, and you talk about some of your favorite genres, which are all over the place, and this is what I love, right? So hip hop and country and dance and classical and disco, and some Latin as well. How did you kind of start branching out into multiple different genres? Because so many people don't.
Yeah, I think house music was always the start, and I don't think I'll ever kind of stop loving house music. And it just derives. I'm 37 years old. I still want to be my brother. Like that. That's the bottom line. I still want to be him, and I still want to be able to DJ. And fortunately enough, every now and then I go back and I get to watch him DJ, and it's kind of, this is why I love you. This is why, like, you're my hero, and I want to do it. But as I branched out from there, when I went to university and things like that, kind of my late teens, so 17, 18, 19, classical music became really apparently important to me, which I didn't realize. And it was a sound that I loved. And again, like we mentioned earlier, that the lyric side of things has never really played a part for me.
Mhm.
It's the sound, it's the groove, it's kind of the trance, and classical music really did that for me. Then I went to university, and my first university was just outside of London, and there was quite a big like Black African community where I was, and in the football team it was quite African like heavy, and that kind of got me into a little bit more um, funky and bouncier music, and I moved into a genre here where that's called kind of funky house, like, and it's based around again just feel good music. And then I was really big with hip hop anyway. I loved hip hop, and I'm always big on finding the roots of things, and where it all started, and understanding, you know, house music coming from disco, and then, you know, understanding that from disco came breaks, and then from breaks came hip hop, and you know, not quite as linear as I'm making out, but
Right, but
it's
it's
kind of
true.
how it branched and how it started, and the idea of MCs coming around, Grandmaster Flash and DJ Hertz and people like that, and it was kind of, that was a sound I loved, you know, and I kind of, I liked breaks and I liked beats and breaks, but it was something that I never really got into, and that just made me start listening to other music. And a lot of my friends were into grime, like UK grime music, like super aggressive, and that was like the big football anthems. That was the big thing that kind of got you ready for games, sort of thing. And then from there, I really got into garage and drum and bass, and that was when I started liking lyrics a bit more.
Mhm.
And even still, the words of what was being said never kind of resonated too much. It was the flow of a rhyme. It was kind of that bounce, that flow, and then as someone of my age, when we were younger, like Eminem was big, 50 Cent kind of came into the scene and things like that. And it was just the flow of rhythms and the way that they were rhyming and stuff. And that kind of got me into hip hop, and I really fixated on that. And I think my age group, hip hop was massive, and the US kind of dominated UK markets. So it
Yes.
was everywhere. You kind of didn't have a choice. And I started going out when I was 18. My brothers finally let me out when I was 18, 19. And I tried to go out younger, but because my brother was a nightclub manager and stuff, there was no doorman or bouncers that would let me in anywhere because he told them not to. So
I
it
love
was,
that.
hip hop was big at that time, and it was really quite influential. Then moving to Bristol. So when I moved from my hometown Loughborough to America, and I spent two years in Arizona, and that was massive for the country side of things. Really got into country a lot more whilst I was out there. That became a little bit more of the lyrics and the messages and kind of what was given out, but it was still the grooves and the upbeat stuff that hooked me. I found it difficult to listen to more of the love side of country,
Yeah.
and I was still on this kind of upbeat grooves and beats and things from that. And moving to Bristol, there's a huge Caribbean influence, and I think we have like the second biggest carnival in the UK. There's Notting Hill in London, and then we have St Paul's Carnival in Bristol, and it's huge. So dancehall became massive for me, reggae, you know, all kind of that side of things. And then I really started getting into like dancehall heavy music, and that's the stuff I love now, and you know, Vibes Cartel and people like that. And day to day, that will be what I listen to a lot more. And then with sprinkles of hip hop on it. So it's kind of wherever I've been, I've tried to soak up a little bit of the culture and the atmosphere around me to know, well, what I want.
I think that's the perfect lesson for anyone
Yeah,
right now, and I've brought it up on the podcast before. It's very easy today, especially for younger people. I mean, because we're called geriatric millennials. For the young ones coming up right now, you can easily stay in your own lane, right? Like you
yeah.
have all of your music on your device, and you can choose your artists and stay there and not branch out. And I like how you just adapted to wherever you were.
Mm.
You were like, okay, let me go ahead and let this kind of wash over me and let me see how I like it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
my brother was massive for it as well, and he was always kind of he's the truest form of somebody who loves house, and you know, he made not made me, but he got me into again, researching and understanding where house came from, and you know, people like Marshall Jefferson and the real originators of that kind of genre. And then it was very much a thing for me where I always wanted to know the history behind it, and it
Yeah.
was a lot more based around the history compared to just knowing what the song is, or knowing what I like and what I don't like. And I think that's why I struggle with pop music a little bit more, because pop music is a trend. I
Yeah.
find it's a trend, and
Yeah.
I'm still of the mind frame that there are 95% of songs that are released now that nobody will listen to in 10 years,
It's so
because there's a,
true.
you know, there's a new trend coming out, or there's a new type of music. And
Right.
mumble rap's the perfect example. So kind of mumble rap came out, a couple
Yeah.
of songs came out, they were big, people listened to it.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what it is now in 5-10 years later on. And I
Right.
think it's important to understand that history and where it's come from, and see where it originates from, and the roots of that particular sound.
I love that. I love that you dive into the history of it, because that's so important. And understanding the roots of songs and where they come from, and even talking today about sampling, because it's such a huge thing now, right?
Mm,
Where you sample, and we definitely started that. Our generation did, from generations prior, like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and we started pulling samples from incredible songs.
mm.
And now that I hear remakes of ours, I'm like, what's happening? Like,
Yeah.
tells your
My
age,
my
obviously.
cousin was really big for it as well. I tried to learn bass when I was younger and stuff. He was Edwin Starr's bass player. So he used to tour with Edwin Starr, and he was so influential for me. Start listening to Motown music, and Michael Jackson was the big one for me. Like I listened to Michael Jackson like everybody did, and then from there it was kind of Michael Jackson's early days, and then seeing who else was around. And you
Yeah.
know, people talk about rap battles and stuff, and I say to anyone, listen to the Temptations and the Four Tops go at it.
Yeah.
You know, that
Exactly.
you want to talk about battles and things like that, and that, you know,
Yeah.
they ran full shows of 30-40 seconds, a minute of each other's songs, and you listen to it and it's hit after hit after hit after hit. And you
Yeah.
know, my brother and my cousin really pointed me in the direction of Nile Rodgers, and that man is nothing short of a genius. And we talk about people like Quincy Jones and stuff, and I don't think people realize
Yeah.
the influence Nile Rodgers had on music, you
Yeah.
know. And he's produced number ones in every single genre you could imagine. He's very much a Quincy Jones. He's literally produced, you know, so many different genres. And to again listen to Chic and the Nile Rodgers and Chic experience, to then
Yeah.
look at David Bowie that he's produced, and Madonna that he's produced, and that kind of helped me branch into other genres as well. And yeah, it's that's kind of a big part of the journey where, luckily enough, my brother and my cousin have said, these are the people you want to listen to. Like, don't worry about Dre and stuff like that right now.
Yeah.
Think about, like I said, Quincy Jones, Michael Jackson, and Nile Rodgers, and these people that you have no idea what they ghost produced and ghost wrote, and the
Yes.
grooves that they came up with, and how they spanned genres.
It's true. It's the breadth of the artistry.
Yeah,
Um, the artistry of music is what I fell in love with. And that's a perfect actual like bridge to the album that you actually chose. We talked about our era, and Eminem and 50 Cent were such a big part of our era as teenagers and going into our 20s. And you chose Animal Ambition of 50 Cent. And I thought it was such a unique choice, that most people wouldn't have thought about. What about that album stood out for you, especially for 50?
yeah. You know what? I came across that album off the back of Dre's one of Dre's later albums, and I'm still backed that episode is kind of one of the best albums ever made. And then when I really started thinking about it, when I was talking to my brother about it, it was very much getting me to listen to other albums, because I never really listened to albums before. I listened to tracks and songs, and then I came across a couple of 50 Cent songs that I really liked, and I was like, what album's it on? And I think when I look at Animal Ambition, there's not a song I don't like. And I think the message and the way that he portrays what he's trying to portray across that album is nothing short of incredible. And going straight from, you know, the start of the album at Hold On and Animal Ambition to halfway through looking at Chasing Papers and Don't
Yeah.
Worry About It. And I think it was a conversation with yourself where I realized more than anything else, it just speaks volumes of the type of person he was, and I could resonate with it. It's kind of the first album that I could resonate with, as opposed to listening to Dre and people like that, where it's, I love the music, I admire Snoop Dogg, I admire the people that he's helped and collabed with and worked with, and the music he's produced, but I don't resonate with it. It's not my culture, it's not my background, it's not kind of where I came from.
Yeah.
Animal Ambition was the same in the sense that obviously my struggles are nothing like 50 Cent's struggles, but actually
Yeah.
it resonates. Like there's things in there where, again, like those particular songs of Animal Ambition and Irregular Heartbeat, and it's kind of actually that fits, you know, that fits where I'm looking, and Hustler and things like that. It's kind of, it just drives something in me to kind of go, okay, I'm in a productive mood now. I'm in a mood ready to do something.
Yeah, and I actually love that you brought up being able to resonate to a song or an experience that an artist is talking about, because I tend to find that we don't realize that everybody has struggles. It doesn't
Mm.
matter where you're from, what's going on. And you might not be able to identify with that specific story that they're talking
Yeah,
about, but you can identify with a struggle that's that big in your world where that you're trying to battle. Because even if you look at Animal Ambition, and I listened to the entirety of the album, which is actually incredible, um, it's really talking about how you battle through those things and how do you
yeah,
bounce back and continually bounce back and show up and show out for yourself more than anybody else, right? But um I love that theme of the bounce back. And as you moved into talking about, like, you struggle with a bit of anxiety, how does music play a part in that for you?
um you know, I don't really have a direct answer, because I don't think I've ever used it as a trigger, for example. You know, I've
Yeah,
not used it in the sense of saying, okay, I'm a little bit all over the shop here, I'm going to listen to music and it will level me or anything like that. I
yeah.
think it's just a go-to, you know,
Mhm.
a natural go-to that I've never realized before.
Yes.
So when I find myself in those situations in life, and you know, I think I've grown up with a single parent, so my mum brought me and my brother up, and I watched my brother go through a lot of stuff and his own struggles, and music was always there and around, and it was always kind of almost like a getaway.
Mm.
And rather than a runaway, it was more just a recenter. So like I was saying about that IT button sort of thing, turn it off, turn it on again. I think that's what it is. And naturally I kind of end up coming full circle and listening to that music. And I think, you know, I think the perfect example would be going into work. And at the moment I travel a lot with work, and sitting in an airport for 9 hours and being like, I think I'm done. Like I don't want to be in this airport for 9 hours. And then I listen to music, and it's kind of, things aren't that bad.
Yeah.
Like things aren't that bad. You know, I'm getting air miles, I'm getting
Right.
points, but
I know the
it's
struggle, trust me.
yeah, it's just a natural kind of go to. I think it's just, I'm fed up with whatever's going on. Let's just
Yeah.
put some music on, and again, simply cleaning the house and cooking or doing things like that. My brother's made sure indirectly that sound is really important to me, you know, and I
Yeah.
can't stand watching TV with standard speakers, and I've invested money into making sure that the sound in my house is
Yeah.
worthwhile, and you know, it makes songs sound better. It kind of gets
Yeah.
into you a little bit more, and it's something that I find so important.
I
And
love that.
yeah, I would definitely say kind of anxiety wise and that kind of stuff. It just ends up a natural reset. And you know, a few years ago, I was I ended up in a horrible place and tried to take my own life. And I think after that, music was the thing. It was the constant reset. It was constant, like, when things got too tough, I went on a walk, but I wouldn't go on a walk without music. I wouldn't go and work out without music. And, you know, savor the people that can do it. But for me, it was definitely just that blanket. Don't worry about it. Just listen to whatever you're listening to, focus on that, and then see what happens after.
Yeah, I think that's such a cool thing, and thank you for sharing with the audience your own personal struggle and experience. It's how we recenter ourselves and how we reset ourselves is critical. And you said, with your own battle with anxiety, I remember asking you just as a friend, like, oh, like, I know you're going on these really long walks, like, what are you thinking about? And you were like, nothing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's finally my time in the day to purposely think about nothing and quieting your mind. And I thought that was brilliant because it's something that I hadn't thought about, right? Because I don't naturally suffer with anxiety in that way. Um, it's that quiet, and I've learned to appreciate quiet now after that conversation. Like, oh, maybe I should think about that a little bit more. And when I can actually turn my brain off. So thank you for
I
that.
think you've hit the nail on the head. It's that turning your brain off. You know, you don't have to focus when you listen to music. That's the thing. You just enjoy it, or you
Yeah.
don't, and you pick a new song. You know, it's one of those where my Spotify's got drum and bass playlists, country playlists, you know, hip hop playlists, house playlists, disco, everything. So it's kind of, if just one's not feeling it, let's put something else on. But there is something there that will fix everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a fact in my life. Um, what is one thing, this is for our listeners and viewers, what is one piece of advice you would give people who are kind of starting their music journey that you find so important?
One piece of advice. I think for me, it's it's know where the music's come from. I think
Mm,
that's the thing for me. You know, if you enjoy something, great. That's the introduction. You know, that's the when you go into to get into something, you know you like it, you know you don't, whatever that situation is. But I think when you find out more about it, there's just a greater appreciation of it. And you know, when we talk about house music, for example, understanding the rave culture that was around, and especially in the UK, and you know, there's a documentary called 24-Hour Party People, and again, my brother was like, watch this. You know, if you want to know about it, watch this. And that was kind of the explosion of rave, and the start of Factory 51 and Happy Mondays, and groups that brought rave music into kind of the, I don't know what you'd say, like the general public. It brought rave music to the general public. And then before that, it was understanding, you know, illegal raves and warehouse raves. And like I said, going all the way back to Marshall Jefferson, who revolutionized the scene from, you know, people telling him you can't put pianos in music. And he just went, watch me.
you're right. Yeah, be a
Watch
rebel.
me do it.
It says who? Why?
Yeah, exactly that. And if you just keep going back, it's again, like I said, going a little bit further back and understanding breaks, understanding where MCs came from, going before that, and understanding that it's disco, and going before that, and it's, you know, partly rock and roll, and how it just transpires and comes through, and understanding what it meant to people. And I think 50 years on, it's always a different message, which is fine. There's no problem with that, because it's evolution, it's progression, it is what it is. But if you go back to that particular example of break music, and understanding the, you know, the kingdoms of Hurt and Grandmaster Flash and people like that, and it was a lifestyle. People had nothing. You know,
Yeah.
they came from areas where that was their ticket out, sort of thing, and that was their moment to feel special. And seeing how that develops, and again, grime music or hip hop, and seeing the stories and where it comes from and how it goes. And my advice would definitely be, if there's something that you like, just try and understand it, understand where it's come from, and why that's ended up where it has. And even if you look at where hip hop used to be, or rap, or whatever genre you want to call it nowadays, but to know, before Dre, before NWA, before people like that, it was made for people. And then you had that whole NWA era of gangster rap, and it was like, we're making this because we want to make it. If
Yeah.
you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Like, but we're
Yeah.
telling you a story, and we're telling you what we're about.
Yeah.
And then to see how that gangster rap develops and develops and develops, and you have MC Ren and Ice Cube and Eazy-E, people like that, where Dre's been fortunate enough to be excellent at his job and introduce people like Eminem. But to see where MWA came from, to see Tupac and Biggie, and then Eminem, and then 50 Cent, and how it kind of just keeps developing and evolves, and it gets you more invested in the sound.
It does. It really does. I love that, because that's the first tip that I've heard so far that's very uniquely different. Get the history behind it, right?
Yeah, I
Like,
think.
take the time to understand. And I think that's just anything that you're learning about, or even people that you're learning about, take the time to understand, right? Because that's how you create connections to things and or people. As you know, I talk to you about that all the time. But I think that's such a crucial part of an experience. And I love that you shared so much today about, like, intertwining multiple different genres and the different stages and different locations you moved to that helped you kind of shape that. Because I know you also did football across multiple different countries, and you even talked about coming to the US for a few years for football as well. What are some of the differences that you saw from the other countries you had experienced music for, and then coming into the US, and what that experience is like?
I think it's everything's culturally led. I think no matter kind of where you go, there's a culture, and music is always a massive part of everybody's culture, because it's what brings people together. And I think the biggest kind of differences I find is, my opinion is, when you have younger people within Europe,
Mhm.
they're a lot more willing to listen to what they want to listen to,
Yeah.
and do what kind of more suits them.
Yeah.
I found stateside, it was a lot more, well, we this is what we listen to. We listen to this, and it's you get sucked into listening to whatever it kind of is. And I
Yeah.
think where I was in Arizona, there's obviously a huge Latino and Hispanic community there,
Yeah.
and they're not always listening to the same kinds of music. And that's not, that's a very big generalization. Obviously, there are lots of cross-cultural music that bands over those, but listening to Latin music and South American music, and it's very culturally embedded.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot harder for cultures outside of Europe, or countries outside of Europe, to branch out and widen a little bit more than
Mhm.
what you find in the UK. I think UK might be more accessible in the ways of that there is a lot of different influence with music. And I think publicly you do get rap, you do get dancehall, you do get lots of different music that is being put out there.
Yeah.
I think just less gets put out there across different cultures within within North America or South America or anything. And I think they have their own versions of things. And you know, rap in France is very different to rap in the
Yeah.
UK. It's
Yeah.
still there. I personally, I don't think it's as prominent, but
Mhm.
I think UK has a lot more of a melting pot with acceptance of different kinds of music.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and that's funny that you mentioned that about the US in general, and it varies so much from state to state. I think,
Mm,
as you mentioned the UK, and you mentioned London, because London is such a melting pot in general, and you'll get that in the US in larger cities, right?
mm,
Like the New Yorks, the LAs, the Chicagos, right? The bigger cities where you see much more of a melting pot,
Yeah.
versus some of the smaller states, where it's a little less population, but it's really focused on like one specific thing, like you said. So I found that to be super interesting just to think about in general.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I love that. Well, as we wrap today, I want to always let our audience members know. Tell us what you thought about this episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts, opinions, any music that you connected to, or artists that we talk about that you connected to in this, and what your general opinions are. Please do and drop those below. But Marco, I want to say thank you for being on the episode. This has been a long time coming to get this to happen. And I appreciate your time and your story.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to be able to kind of broadcast this over the web as opposed to not being there. And I do apologize that we haven't had to do it. We haven't been able to do it face to face, but thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.